We begin this hour in Israel, where the extremely fragile ceasefire with Hamas was tested just hours after going into effect. Clashes between Palestinian protesters and Israeli police broke out outside a mosque in Jerusalem on Friday. Protesters were seen hurling rocks and Molotov cocktails at officers. Israeli police launched tear gas and rubber bullets into the crowds. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas went into effect at 2 a.m. local time. Both sides are claiming victory. Celebrations were seen across the Gaza Strip overnight. Thousands of Palestinians gathered to celebrate the end of 11 straight days of violence. The Israeli military and Hamas militants traded thousands of rockets throughout the conflict. Although there has been loss of life on both sides, the damage has caused a dire humanitarian crisis across the Gaza Strip. CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams is there with more.
So far, this ceasefire appears to be holding. We have just crossed over into the Gaza Strip in the last few minutes, and what I can tell you is that we can hear the sounds of ordinary life, and that is extraordinary because over the previous 11 days, more than 4,000 rockets were launched from the Gaza Strip towards Israeli towns and cities, killing 13 people. And in the same period, this tiny patch of land, impoverished, overcrowded, about 25 miles long, home to around 2 million Palestinians, was pummeled by blistering Israeli airstrikes that killed more than 200 people, according to Palestinian officials, including at least 65 children. This ceasefire leaves a lot of questions unanswered, including, crucially, whether it sets the stage for negotiations between the two sides. At this point, though, both sides seem to be portraying the conflict as having delivered gains to them. We've just now heard from the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who claimed that the Israeli campaign did unprecedented damage to Hamas. That is the group that controls the Gaza Strip and is regarded as a terrorist organization by the US. Meanwhile, Hamas in this region is pretty widely regarded as having gained politically from the conflict. And indeed, there were celebrations on the street here in Gaza last night. However, no matter which way you look at this ceasefire, it seems pretty fragile. This conflict was sparked by threatened evictions and clashes in Jerusalem. And if you don't resolve the underlying issues, which is that two peoples both fervently believe that the same piece of land is their country, and one group is much more powerful economically and militarily, then there is a very strong chance that the same scenario will happen all over again.
And joining us now from the New York Times is David Halbfinger. He is a former bureau chief of the Times Jerusalem Bureau. David, welcome. Great to have you with us. So the ceasefire went into effect this morning at 2 a.m. local time. What more do we know about the deal and how it came to fruition?
I mean, there's not a whole lot more to know, right? These are two sides that I think were looking for a way to end the fighting. And, you know, they've agreed to stop shooting. They each declare victory. They each make, threats to start up again if the other side doesn't keep quiet. But they exchange quiet for quiet in the meantime. It's like ceasefires we've seen again and again in recent years in Gaza. Each side has drawn some blood. I think just as Netanyahu can say that Israel exacted this unprecedented toll on Hamas, Hamas can say the same about its campaign of rocket strikes on Israel. Despite the Iron Dome, it drew blood. There were Israeli casualties and deaths. They managed to send like really statistical barrages, hundreds of rockets at once, really overwhelming the Iron Dome, which can only get around 9 out of 10. So some are going to get through, and they did. So really everybody can say that they accomplished something, and now they can go back to the status quo in between these outbreaks.
So what really is then the purpose? Because we've seen, like you said, this happen before, the violence, the ceasefire. What makes this any different, or is this not any different than ceasefires in the past? And how long do you predict this one will hold?
Yeah, I'm not in the prediction business. But I mean, part of the issue here is that the situation doesn't change, and the situation doesn't change because to some degree it serves everybody's interests. As long as Netanyahu is in power in Israel, he has, been perfectly content, I think actions show, despite words, to have Hamas rule the Gaza Strip. He's said publicly in Israel, he's somebody who doesn't believe in a two-state solution. His right-wing base, which is really dominant in Israel these days, doesn't want a two-state solution. And the best way to avoid having to even talk about a two-state solution is if the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which are separated geographically, are also separated politically. And it's even easier to avoid having a real peace process if the Gaza Strip is in the hands of Hamas, which the United States, Israel, and much of the world view as a terrorist organization not worth talking to. So if you can't unify the Palestinian people, the polity, the politics under one leader who can negotiate with Israel, Israel can just say to the rest of the world, I don't have a partner. And this can keep going on. And really, we've seen these cycles where Netanyahu buys some quiet when it suits him. And then, there are an awful lot of people in Israel today who believe that the provocations in East Jerusalem that preceded this war were maybe, a little bit deliberate on Israel's part to rile up its own right wing in Israel and to provoke the Palestinians into something that could put Netanyahu back in the position of bringing order and preserving peace and being Mr. Security, as he likes to position himself, to sustain his own hold on power.
And so where does that leave the U.S. in this intractable situation? Because Netanyahu does not believe in a two-state solution. President Biden has said he does. He's touted his administration's foreign diplomacy efforts following the truce. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu called the ceasefire an Egyptian-brokered deal. Right. So what exactly is the U.S.'s role in this ceasefire and, to a larger degree in the region?
Yeah, it's very interesting. First of all, Netanyahu's right. The Egyptians played the heaviest role in actually getting this done. But they did so with the support of the United States, with the thanks of President Biden. And the Egyptians talked to Hamas. So they're necessary to any solution here, to any resolution or ceasefire. And they've played this role again and again. The Gaza is important to them, too, for their national security. So what I find really interesting is that Biden, his administration deserves plenty of criticism for being flat-footed and slow to get involved. And really, I think they wanted to do anything but deal with Israel and the Palestinians until it really got to be too much to handle. But they were slow to deal and respond and criticize those Israeli provocations in East Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, and so on. But what they did do, and what Biden is claiming credit for, is the old arm around Israel approach. You put your arm around Israel, you express support and friendship, that you're in solidarity with them, and at the same time you kind of tighten that grip and you nudge them in the direction that you want them to go. But the other thing is, Netanyahu and Biden have had this really interesting relationship over time, and just as Netanyahu has, throughout many American administrations, positioned himself in between the right-wing base in Israel and, in particular, Democratic presidents in the United States, but also some Republicans, and he's told each of them, listen, I'm really with you, but these other guys are just unreasonable, and you got to just trust me here. Biden is basically doing the same thing. Here he's making the usual affirmations of friendship and support for Israel in public, but he's also dealing with a much more restless and agitating Democratic left wing, which is eager to sort of make this break with Israel's actions, not necessarily with Israel entirely, but with Israel's actions towards the Palestinians. And he can say to Israel, look, I'm really with you, but I got these people on my left flank, and you just got to give me something here. So it's a nice turnabout. Right. I think it reflects Biden's history with Netanyahu and on this subject.
Good point. President Biden is negotiating his own truces within his party. All right. Well, David Halbfinger, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Glad to be here.